Welcome back to Billionaire Success Lessons. Today, I want to tell you the story of a man who did not begin with a giant factory, a famous logo, or a global empire. He began with uncertainty, a strange idea, a deep love of running, and the courage to chase a future nobody else could fully see. This is the story of Phil Knight, the man who helped turn a handshake partnership into Nike, and whose life proves that success is not built in comfort. It is built in doubt, risk, persistence, and the willingness to keep going when almost nothing feels secure. Phil Knight would go from a young runner in Oregon to the co-founder of what Nike itself now describes as the world's leading sports brand, and he serves today as Chairman Emeritus of Nike Inc. Phil Knight was born in Portland, Oregon in 1938, and long before he became a billionaire, he was simply a young man trying to understand where he belonged in the world. He studied at the University of Oregon, where he ran middle distance on the track team under the legendary coach Bill Bowerman. That relationship would change his life. Bowerman was not just a coach. He was obsessed with helping runners move faster, feel lighter, and perform better. He constantly experimented with shoes, cutting them apart, rebuilding them, and trying to improve them. Phil Knight was one of the athletes who got pulled into that world sometimes, literally serving as a test subject. F.O.R. Bowerman's ideas, that early experience planted something powerful in him. It taught him that performance could be improved, that old products could be reimagined, and that progress often begins with dissatisfaction. After Oregon, Phil Knight served in the U.S. Army for a year and then went on to Stanford Graduate School of Business. At Stanford, he was given an assignment to come up with a business idea, and instead of choosing something ordinary, he wrote about a possibility that sounded bold at the time: importing high-quality, lower-cost Japanese running shoes into the American market, which was then dominated by German brands. Stanford later noted that he earned an A for that paper. What matters here is not only the paper itself. What matters is the mindset behind it. Phil Knight was not waiting for a perfect opportunity to appear. He was training himself to notice change before the rest, how the world fully believed in it. That is one of the deepest patterns in every extraordinary success story. The future usually arrives first as an idea that sounds uncertain. But having an idea on paper and building a real life around it are two very different things. After Stanford, Phil Knight did not instantly become a celebrated founder. He was still searching. He still had doubts. He still had to decide whether he would live safely or boldly. In 1962, after finishing business school, he traveled the world and made a crucial stop in Kobe, Japan. There he encountered Onitsuka, tiger running shoes, and saw exactly what he had imagined at Stanford, a product that could compete. He secured a distribution arrangement to sell the shoes in the United States. That moment was not flashy. No cameras, no headlines, no applause, just a young man taking a quiet step toward a future that did not yet exist. But that is how life-changing journeys often begin. Not with noise, but with decision. When Phil Knight returned to Oregon, he did something simple but historic. He joined forces with Bill Bowerman. Nike's own history now describes the beginning as a handshake partnership, and that image says so much about the kind of faith real builders need. In 1964, the two co-founded Blue Ribbon Sports, the precursor to Nike. At first, this was not a polished corporation. It was small, fragile, and uncertain. Stanford notes that Knight initially sold shoes out of his car at track meets while supporting himself as an accountant. And Nike later referred to the trunk of his 1964 Plymouth Valiant as part of the company's humble beginnings. That is a picture people should remember. One of the most powerful brands in the world did not begin in perfection. It began in motion, in effort, in small sales and long days. This part of Phil Knight's journey matters because many people imagine success as a sudden leap. They think great lives are built in one breakthrough moment. But the truth is usually harder and slower. In those early years, Phil Knight was not living inside certainty. He was living inside pressure. Stanford has described Nike's early years as tumultuous, and Knight himself often returned to the persistence lesson he heard in business school: the only time you must not fail is the last time you try. That idea captures the heart of his story. He kept going through unstable beginnings, through the tension of building something small while dreaming something huge, through the emotional difficulty of carrying an ambition that most people around you cannot yet measure. Blue Ribbon Sports began as an importer and seller of Japanese-made running shoes, but Bill Bowerman's influence quickly pushed the company beyond simple distribution. Nike's own historical material explains that Bowerman's relentless curiosity and footwear innovation shaped the company's ethos. He wanted shoes that were lighter, more comfortable, and capable of going the distance. He learned to make shoes, to study their anatomy, to rebuild them with better materials, and to use athlete feedback to improve performance. Phil Knight brought the business drive. Bowerman brought the experimental obsession. Together, they formed a rare partnership. One mind saw the opportunity in the market, and the other saw the opportunity inside the product itself. That combination is part of what made the company special. From the very beginning, but building a business around another company's product always carries danger. If your future depends on someone else's factory, someone else's approval, someone else's contract, then your foundation is never fully your own. Nike's official history of the swoosh explains that by the early 1970s, Blue Ribbon Sports could feel its supplier relationship winding down, and Phil Knight knew the company's future depended on more than somebody else's shoe. To survive and grow, it needed an identity of its own. That was a frightening moment, because it meant leaving the security of distribution and stepping into the uncertainty of creation. Many people can sell what already exists. Far fewer can risk everything to build what does not. Phil Knight chose the harder road. That decision led to one of the most recognizable reinventions in business history. Blue Ribbon Sports needed a new brand, a new symbol, and a new future. Nike's official account says that Jeff Johnson, the company's first full-time employee, was among the early team members shaping that identity. And Stanford notes that he proposed the name Nike around the same time Phil Knight turned to Portland State. Design student Carolyn Davison for a mark that could distinguish the company's new shoes. She created the checkmark-shaped stripe that would become the swoosh. And Nike records that she sent an invoice for just $35. Phil Knight famously did not instantly fall in love with it. But the symbol endured, and eventually it became one of the most recognized marks in the world. That is another lesson hidden inside this story. Not every great beginning looks great in the moment. Sometimes even iconic things start out looking awkward, strange, or uncertain. In the first years of Nike, nothing was guaranteed. The logo was new. The company name was new. The shoes were still fighting for attention. The brand had not yet become a global symbol of victory. It was just a small, scrappy company trying to prove it belonged. Nike's official history notes that the first shoe to carry the new mark was a soccer cleat called the Nike, and that the earliest swooshes appeared in imperfect, inconsistent ways as factories rushed production. But the point was not perfection. The point was momentum. Phil Knight was learning one of the hardest lessons in entrepreneurship. If you wait for every detail to feel perfect, you may never launch at all. Sometimes you build, adjust, learn, and improve while the world is watching. The company also understood something that many businesses overlook. Products matter, but belief matters too. In the early 1970s, Nike began connecting with runners in a way that felt authentic and alive. Steve Prefontaine became a major early force in that story. Nike's own history says his association with the company helped establish the swoosh as a trusted running brand from a national shoe distributor into a worldwide brand. In 1973, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman supported Prefontaine with a stipend, and he began introducing athletes to Nike shoes with infectious energy. This was not just marketing in the modern sense. It was community, identity, and conviction. Phil Knight was not merely building a product line. He was helping build a culture around ambition, speed, courage, and sport. What makes Phil Knight's story so moving is that beneath all the business milestones, it is really a story about faith under pressure. He did not know in those early years that Nike would become a giant. He only knew that the idea mattered to him. He knew runners needed better shoes. He knew the market could be challenged. He knew the old way was not the only way. And when you follow an idea like that, life becomes uncomfortable. You risk embarrassment. You risk failure. You risk looking foolish in front of people who chose safer roads. Phil Knight kept walking that path anyway. That is one of the reasons his journey touches so many people. He reminds us that courage is not the absence of uncertainty. Courage is continuing well. Uncertainty is still very much alive. As the company grew, Phil Knight took on larger leadership roles. Nike's official biography says he served as the company's president from 1968 to 1990 and again from 2000 to 2004, with a brief interruption. In the 1980s, Britannica notes that during his long leadership tenure, Nike became one of the most successful companies in the world. That success did not happen because Phil Knight was trying to look important. It happened because he stayed committed long enough for the vision to compound. That is something people often underestimate. Greatness is not only intelligence or creativity. Greatness is often long obedience to one demanding idea. Phil Knight stayed with the mission through reinvention, through expansion, through pressure, and through the difficult responsibility of leading something that had grown beyond anyone's early imagination. And when Nike grew, it did not grow by abandoning the spirit that started it. The company's own history keeps returning to Bowerman's obsession with innovation, athlete insight, and better performance. That spirit became part of Nike's DNA. Phil Knight helped create not only a company, but a way of thinking, challenge the standard, listen to athletes, keep improving, and never assume that today's success is enough for tomorrow. That mindset is one reason the story of Nike continues to feel larger than business. It is about motion. It is about restless improvement. It is about refusing to settle for what already exists just because it is familiar. There is also something deeply human in Phil Knight's personality and path. He was not presented to the world as a flashy superhero from the start. He often seemed private, thoughtful, even uncertain in his own way. But inside that personality was a fierce endurance. He could hold tension. He could live with risk. He could stay committed while the outcome remained unclear. And those qualities matter more than people realize. Many dreams do not die because they are impossible. They die because the dreamer grows tired before the dream grows strong. Phil Knight's life speaks to that truth. The reason he reached the other side was not because the road was easy. It was because he kept moving on hard roads for a very long time. Today, when people see Nike, they see scale, visibility, and victory. They see a global symbol. They see an empire of sport. But Nike's official biography of Phil Knight still traces that enormous success back to a small partnership founded on a handshake. That contrast is exactly why his story matters. He did not begin at the summit. He began in a place so humble that many people would have dismissed it. A runner, a coach, a trunk full of shoes, a paper at Stanford, a deal in Japan, a few early believers. That was enough to start. Not enough to guarantee success, but enough to begin. And beginning is often the most sacred part of any great journey. There were also losses, tensions, and seasons of strain along the way, because no real success story is free from those things. Building a company means carrying more than products and profits. It means carrying fear, responsibility, exhaustion, and the burden of decisions that can change other people's lives, even when the public only sees the triumph. The founder often lives through years of hidden difficulty. That is why Phil Knight's story should never be reduced to money alone. The billions came later. The deeper story was built much earlier, in the years when the dream still looked fragile and the future still looked uncertain. Those are the years that form a person. Those are the years that teach resilience. And maybe that is the greatest lesson Phil Knight leaves. For all of us, success does not begin when the world believes in you. It begins when you keep working even before the world understands you. It begins when you take your strange ideas seriously. It begins when you keep faith with a calling that feels bigger than your current circumstances. Phil Knight saw it better, a way to serve runners. And he stayed loyal to that vision long enough for it to reshape an industry. He teaches us that you do not need a perfect start. You need conviction, patience, and the willingness to keep learning as you go. So if you are in a season where your dreams still look small, remember Phil Knight in the early days. Remember the student with the paper. Remember the runner with the question. Remember the young entrepreneur selling shoes from his car. Remember the uncertain logo that became iconic. Remember the handshake that became a worldwide company. These things should encourage you. The size of your beginning says very little about the size of your destiny. What matters is whether you are willing to keep showing up, keep adapting, and keep believing long after other people would have quit. In the end, Phil Knight's story is not just the story of Nike, it is the story of persistence meeting vision. It is the story of risk meeting discipline. It is the story of a man who could have chosen a more predictable life, but instead chose to build. And by building, he created something that outlived every early doubt. That is why his journey belongs here on Billionaire Success Lessons. Because Phil Knight reminds us that the people who change the world are not always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they are the ones who quietly hold on to an idea. Endure the hard years and keep moving until the impossible becomes real.